Shrinkflation. You pick up the same bag of crisps you've bought for a decade. Same brand, same packaging, same price, same everything, except it's now 11% lighter and you have no idea because nobody memorizes grams. That's the entire strategy. Manufacturers learned something genuinely useful about human psychology. People notice price changes instantly and size changes almost never. Raise the price 10% and you get complaints, boycotts, angry posts. Shrink the contents 10% and you get silence. The number on the shelf is the one your brain guards. The weight printed in small text on the back is the one nobody defends. Documented cases run across chocolate bars, toilet rolls, cereal, ice cream, detergent, and toothpaste. The same product quietly losing mass in increments across years. You aren't paying more for your groceries. You're paying the same for less of them, which is the identical thing wearing a disguise. Skimpflation.
When shrinking the product is impossible, the quality goes instead. The hotel room costs the same, but housekeeping is now every third day. The flight cost the same, but the seat lost 2 inches and the bag acquired a fee. The shirt cost the same, but the cotton became a blend, and it survives 12 washes instead of 40. None of this shows up in any inflation measurement because inflation tracks prices, and the price didn't move. What moved was everything you were actually buying. This is why so many people insist things aren't made like they used to be and get told they're romanticizing the past. They aren't always romanticizing. Sometimes the thing genuinely got worse, and the receipt stayed identical. Shrinkflation takes something off your plate. Skimpflation leaves the plate full and swaps out what's on it. Inflation coming down. This is the single most misunderstood sentence in economics, and the reason people believe they're being gaslit by the news. A government announces inflation has fallen from 9% to 3%. Headlines celebrate. You go shopping, everything is still brutally expensive, and you conclude somebody is lying. Nobody is lying. Inflation isn't the price, it's the speed of the price. Falling inflation means prices are climbing more slowly, not that they're coming back down. Picture a car accelerating. Easing off the accelerator doesn't reverse the car, it just stops it getting faster. Prices behave the same way, and they very rarely go backwards because falling prices, actual deflation, are treated by economists as a disaster considerably worse than inflation, so the increases stay permanently. Inflation returning to normal doesn't mean prices return to normal. It means the damage stopped growing.
Compounding. 3% sounds like nothing. It's the number central banks aim for, the number described as healthy, the target everybody wants to get back to. Run it forward. 3% a year for 10 years isn't 30%. It's about 34, because each year's rise is calculated on top of the previous year's rise. Over 24 years at that rate, prices double. At the levels much of the world saw recently, 7, 8, 9%, prices double in roughly 9 years. That's one apartment lease, 1 degree, one child moving from primary school to secondary. And the doubling never announces itself. It arrives as a sequence of individually reasonable increases, none of which felt worth arguing about at the time. Nothing ever jumped. That's precisely why it worked. You weren't robbed once. You were charged slightly more repeatedly until the total became unrecognizable. Cover pricing. When inflation is in the news every single day, something very useful happens for companies. Raising prices stops being a decision anyone has to defend. Normally, an increase carries risk. Customers notice, competitors undercut you, somebody asks why. During a widely reported inflationary period, that risk collapses because everyone already expects prices to rise, and nobody can tell which increases were forced by costs and which simply weren't. Analyses of corporate earnings across that period found a great many firms expanding their profit margins while simultaneously citing rising costs. Both things were true at once. Costs did rise. Prices rose further. Inflation didn't only raise prices, it supplied the cover under which prices could be raised further than inflation ever required. Your reference prices. Somewhere in your head is a list of what things cost, and that list was written years ago and has never been updated. You know a coffee costs about 2, a cinema ticket about 8, a decent pair of shoes about 50. Those numbers feel like facts. They're memories, and most of them are between 5 and 15 years old because your brain stores the price it paid when it first started paying serious attention to that category, which for most people is early adulthood. So every purchase becomes a small argument between what something costs and what you're convinced it ought to cost. That gap is where the feeling of expensive actually lives. It isn't really a measure of price. It's a measure of the distance between now and the version of you who first learned that price. Everything didn't get more expensive. Some of it did. The rest just drifted further from your memory.
The basket. Inflation figures come from tracking a basket of goods, hundreds of items, weighted by how much a typical household spends on each one. The problem is that no household is typical. If you own your home outright, drive rarely, and cook everything, your personal inflation rate can sit far below the published number. If you're renting, commuting, and eating out, it can sit dramatically above it. Rent, food, and fuel have risen far faster than televisions, laptops, and clothing across most economies. So the official figure isn't wrong, it's an average, and averages describe populations, not people. Half of everyone is above it by definition. When the number says 3% and your life says 12, you aren't misreading your own bank statement. You're just not the household the number was built to describe. Real wages. A raise has two numbers, and you're only ever told one of them. Nominal is the figure on your payslip. Real is that figure after inflation.
If you receive a 4% raise in a year when prices rise 5%, your nominal pay went up and your real pay went down by 1%. You got a raise and got poorer simultaneously, and every part of that is arithmetically normal. Across many advanced economies, real wages spent several recent years falling while payslips kept showing increases. That produces a very particular kind of confusion, because you can see with complete clarity that you earn more than you did 5 years ago, and also that you can afford less. Both are true at once. Your income didn't fail to grow, it just grew slower than the things you buy with it. Housing. Shelter is the largest single expense in most household budgets, typically somewhere between a quarter and a half of income, and it doesn't behave like other prices. It doesn't only cost more, it reprices everything else.
When rent rises in a city, every business operating in that city faces higher costs, and those costs turn up in your coffee, your haircut, your dentist, your gym. Wages then have to rise for anybody to afford living there, which raises prices again. Housing is the input sitting underneath almost every service you buy. That's why service inflation is so stubborn and so hard to reverse. You can ship a cheaper television from anywhere on Earth, but you cannot import a haircut. Housing isn't one line on your budget competing with the others. It's the floor the others are standing on, and it has been rising.
The missing cheap option. Walk into a shop looking for the basic version of something, and increasingly there isn't one. Not because it became expensive, because it was discontinued. When costs rise, companies frequently find it more profitable to delete their lowest margin product line entirely than to raise its price, and to move everybody up a tier. The budget airline seat still exists, but no longer includes a bag. The entry-level phone was quietly retired. The plain version of the appliance now only comes with a touchscreen. You experience all of this as a price rise. Technically, it isn't one. The cheap thing didn't get more expensive. The cheap thing stopped being sold, and you were moved to the next thing up, which always costs what it costs. Your options narrowed, your spending rose, and no price tag ever changed to tell you. Subscription creep. There's an entire category of things you used to buy once and now rent forever. Software you owned, music you owned, films you owned. Increasingly, features inside a car you already paid for. Individually, each one is small, and that's the design. $7, $12, $4. Figures deliberately positioned below the threshold where people perform mental arithmetic. Collectively, they represent one of the largest shifts in household spending in a generation. Surveys consistently find people underestimate their own monthly subscription total by a factor of 2 or 3. Go and count yours right now and put the number in the comments, because almost nobody guesses correctly. And the change isn't only financial. Ownership has an ending. Rent doesn't. A purchase has a final payment. A subscription is engineered specifically never to have one. The price of money. Everything so far has been about the cost of things. This one is the cost of borrowing to get them, and it moves a household budget more violently than any grocery bill ever will. When central banks raise rates to slow inflation, the sticker price of a house doesn't need to change at all for that house to become unaffordable. At 3%, a $300,000 mortgage costs roughly $1,200 a month. At 7%, it's around $2,000. Same house, same price, $800 more every month for 30 years. The same mechanism applies simultaneously to car loans, credit cards, and business borrowing. The cure for expensive things is expensive money, and expensive money is itself expensive. Rates aren't a separate story from inflation. They're the tool being used against it, and you're the surface it's being used on. And here's the last piece, which explains why it feels worse than any statistic will ever admit. You don't experience prices evenly. You buy groceries weekly, fuel weekly, coffee daily. You buy a television once a decade.
Televisions, laptops, clothing, and long-haul flights have in many cases become cheaper in real terms across the last 20 years, and you carry essentially no emotional record of that because you weren't standing there watching it happen. Rent, food, insurance, and childcare rose, and you meet those constantly. Your entire sense of the economy is assembled from the things you buy most often, which happen to be the things that rose fastest. So the feeling is real. It just isn't measuring what you think it's measuring. You aren't imagining that everything got more expensive. You're accurately remembering the only part of it you were ever made to look at.